This video is sponsored by Mech. Jaws made you afraid of the ocean. Well, The Descent will make you afraid of mildly threatening holes in the ground. Directed by Neil Marshall, the director of the cult hit Dog Soldiers, the anti-furry propaganda movie, The Descent aims to take the traditionally male-dominated world of horror movies and switch those roles for an almost all-female cast. It's a British horror movie that actually had to fast-track a lot of its production to compete against the similar upcoming American movie called The Cave, because apparently in 2005, subterranean horror movies were in high demand. The movie begins by introducing us to a group of adventurous friends as they're rafting their way down a river, while Sarah's husband and daughter watch on from the sidelines. The women make it past the home stretch and back to land, and after packing up and heading off home with her family, Sarah's noticed that her husband has been somewhat distant lately and asks how he's doing, to which he responds that he's perfectly fine, before very quickly being made the opposite of perfectly fine as the car collides head-on with a van, resulting in a metal pole flying through the front window, killing both the husband and the daughter in the process. An undisclosed amount of time later, awoken into somewhat of a nightmare scenario, the first of many for Sarah to experience, she learns that she's the sole survivor of the car accident and that her husband and daughter are now gone. A year passes, and we see that Sarah hasn't entirely given up on life after experiencing such grief, and has decided to continue pushing onwards. Her and Beth are visiting their friends, Juno, Becca, Sam and Holly, over in the United States up in the Appalachian Mountains. And as kind of a running theme on this channel would suggest, nothing good ever happens in the Appalachian Mountains. They all spend the night catching up, drinking and having some fun in a cabin, but it is clear that despite having brief moments of fun from time to time, Sarah's almost always reminded of what's been taken from her, whether that's just a comment made by one of the women about them wanting to have kids one day, or an absolutely horrific nightmare involving her too getting a metal pole sent through the front of her face. And after having a good time catching up and drinking together, the women settle down for the night and dream about today's sponsor, Mech. Yeah, I really did just make that transition. Mech is a 5v5 casual and fun mech shooter with good visuals, interesting maps, and smooth performance. Being more of a brute force kind of player, I've been rolling with the Guardian, a mech that focuses on tearing down defenses and blowing the enemy away with its heavy weapons and system crash ability. It can shut down enemy abilities like shields or stuns, and it forces the enemy to completely reload their weapons. It's a powerful beast, but it's also a balancing game, as it's got a relatively slow moving speed and not a lot of health to go along with it. But thanks to its special ability and strength to carry the heaviest weapons in the game, it makes it perfect for taking out tanks. Another favourite, the Panther, offers more of a defensive playstyle, with its ability Stasis Barrier that puts down an invincible wall that blocks enemy bullets and slows anybody that passes through. It's got a good movement speed and protection from its stasis barrier, meaning that it's perfect for getting into the thick of it, dealing some damage, and then quickly slipping out of there. Mech got a ton happening this month. There's a brand new pilot, Maverick, the amazing Paradise Plaza map has been added to the game, and they've got a whole month of special events happening, so make sure that you take The Descent, see what I did there, down into the description and click my link to get started with Mech. It's completely free to play on Android and iOS right now, and you can use my personal link or scan my QR code on screen to get 1 mil-spec skin, 500 A-coins, and 70,000 credits to help kickstart your game. And hey, if you're quick, you can add me to your friends list too. Despite the hardship that she's faced recently, Sarah's clearly glad to have the friendship of these women, and the next day, they're all going to head deep into the woods to do some caving. And after they find the location of their adventure, they each descend into its depths, but pretty quickly, a few of the women are a little concerned about it, with Sarah coming across what seems to be bloody claw marks along the walls, and one of the women surprised that the place doesn't resemble the guidebook that they've been reading. An obvious stay away sign, such as bleeding claw marks along the walls, being ignored, the women venture onwards and begin their expedition into the cave system. And as they force their way into ever-tightening passageways, narrow corridors and flooded rooms, it's immediately evident that this entire movie is about to be a claustrophobic person's nightmare. Since the accident and the loss of her family, not only has Sarah been suffering from near-constant nightmares and dreams about her daughter, but while down here, she can occasionally hear what sounds to be her little daughter giggling. But as Holly pointed out as the women walk towards the cave, it's actually quite common to suffer from auditory and visual hallucinations while being exposed to the environments present in a cave. But you can hardly blame Sarah. Strange little things like that tend to happen after watching your family horrifically die in front of you. One thing that'll put you out of the immersion of a movie is when something that's clearly meant to be extremely heavy is able to be moved with ease. In movies, you'll often see that's the case with rocks and rubble, as the character is able to throw it as if it's a giant piece of styrofoam, usually because it is a giant piece of styrofoam. And considering that the entirety of the cave scenes featured within this movie take place in a series of 21 built sets, it's surprisingly a well-convincing job, except from time to time where you will occasionally see something move in a manner which it really shouldn't. For example, as Sarah gets her bag snagged while crawling through a tunnel, and as she frantically moves around in a panic, various pieces of large stone suspiciously move with ease. But considering the circumstances of them never once setting foot in a real cave, these incidents are surprisingly few and far between. I guess you'd be kind of liable if you accidentally crushed your lead actor to death with a 500-pound boulder. As Beth's backtracked to help calm down Sarah, suddenly the rocks begin to shift as a tunnel collapse has begun. Luckily, the women are able to make it out of there just in the nick of time, but with the only problem being, the way they came is now completely sealed. They're all comforted by the fact that the guidebook that they've been reading states that there's 3 possible exits to this cave. That is, up until they find out they're not in that cave. Juno has took them to a different one without telling them, due to her wanting the group to be the ones to discover it. So everybody who knows the women are out caving think they're in an entirely different cave, and as far as they know, not one single human has ever set foot in this place. So, with going back entirely out of the question at this point, they're forced to traverse a sheer drop to continue onwards, and in the process of doing so, discover a spike in the rock, indicating that someone has been here at some point, but it's not exactly comforting in the way you might expect, because judging by the spike that they found, they can tell that it must be at least 100 years old. After they all manage to safely make it across the drop, Juno takes it upon herself to climb back out there to retrieve the equipment, as they don't know what they'll face next, and chances are they'll probably need it. But in the process she slips, slamming into a rock wall and tearing open Becca's hand as she desperately tries to hold on to the rope, which would seem to be the movie setting up something relating to her cut hand later. Perhaps Becca's unable to hold on to a piece of rope, or maybe she's unable to quickly climb up onto something. But nope, it's never mentioned again, so I guess she's just got a boo-boo now. After making it across the sheer drop relatively unharmed, excluding Becca's hand of course, they discover an ancient, untouched cave painting on the walls, left behind by presumably the pre-modern humans who inhabited this place, that indicates that there's actually 2 entrances to the cave, and that the group might actually have a chance of getting out of here alive. That, or a Neanderthal took some artistic liberties with his drawing. Holly rushes off in front of the group, falling down a hole in the process, after seeing what she believes to be daylight, but what it actually turns out to be is phosphorus in the rock that can actually give off the illusion of there being an opening in the cave. She survives the fall, but breaks her leg in the process, causing the bone to protrude from her body in a way that the bone really shouldn't be protruding. With no anesthesia or anything to numb the pain, with Holly being fully conscious, the friends are forced to push the bone back into the body in an absolutely agonizing display of amateur surgery, before using one of the ice picks to create a splint for her. And as the group of friends are tending to Holly's rather serious leg wound, Sarah just kinda wanders off to go and do whatever she wants, because you don't have a seriously injured friend who needs your help or anything like that. And as she's drifted off from the group, that's when we get the first glimpse of what else is down here with the women. Gross white people. The rest of the group aren't exactly buying Sarah's Elder Scrolls Falmer spotting, but very quickly have their minds changed as they stumble upon a collection of bones, clearly some kind of feeding pit that must belong to something or someone. And while using the infrared mode on the camcorder, they spot one of the creatures standing right next to them all, before it then sprints off and clambers up onto the ceiling, as if it's been taken right out of an Exorcist movie or something. The actors for both the women and the cave creatures had been kept apart as much as possible prior to this scene, so the sheer terror and panic to their reaction is actually somewhat of a real reaction, as they simply just didn't know what to expect. Now very much believing what Sarah saw was true, they all make a run for it, but end up coming face to face with the creature as it leaps over Holly and tears open her neck. Using nothing but an ice pick, Juno attempts to fend off the creature as it begins to try and drag Holly's body off into the darkness. But while doing so, she's tackled from behind as another creature pounces on her. Holly's body is taken away, and Juno begins a frantic fight for her life as the creature repeatedly attempts to bury its fangs into her and claw at her face. But after an intense struggle on the floor, Juno manages to get the upper hand by grabbing her ice pick and repeatedly burying it into the chest of the creature and killing it. Terrified and on high alert, she hears something approaching from behind, and without even thinking, she swings the ice pick towards the noise, only to learn that she's thrusted it through the neck of her friend, Beth. Beth stands there, scared and confused about what's just happened to her, as she suddenly begins to gurgle on her own blood. She falls to the floor, slowly and painfully bleeding to death through the small hole in her neck, and as she begs Juno to please not leave her here to die, Juno stares right back at her, almost disassociating from the current events, as she slowly backs away into the darkness, leaving her there. As Sarah sprinted away from the creatures, she ended up falling down a hole and being knocked unconscious, because boy does this movie like dropping people down holes and knocking them unconscious. She wakes up with the infrared camera pointed directly into her face and uses it to be able to see her surroundings. She's forced to sit there in absolute terror as a pack of hungry creatures appear and begin to dig into Holly's corpse. One of them comes face to face with Sarah, with the camera pointed directly into its face, but it doesn't react. It's clear that whatever this thing is clearly blind and only reacts to sound. And judging by the ancient cave paintings and the backstory that you can find about the creatures online, it appears that this race of humanoid blind white creatures actually are humans. Humans that have lived subterranean lives for more than a millennia. Cavemen that decided to relocate deep into the darkness below the earth, to only appear on the surface in order to hunt for food, as each generation would breed down there, gradually evolving them into becoming the perfect creatures to thrive in such an environment. Just a shame that they didn't evolve to become ice pick proof. The same thing happens to Becca and Sam, as they also discover that the creatures are blind, as while they're huddled together in an attempt to hide from the creature, it simply walks right up to the pair and then straight past them, without it ever realizing that they were there. They quickly learn that they react to sound, as Sam's wristwatch begins to beep, narrowly avoiding the deadly confrontation as she throws it away from her. Amongst the pile of bones left behind in the creature's feeding pit, Sarah manages to discover an old fuel lamp that's clearly been down here for quite some time. Maybe even by the same people who placed that spike in the rocks earlier. Luckily for her, it still has fuel in it, and she's able to create herself a makeshift torch to see, kind of forgetting the fact that when things burn, they create noise. Creating the question in itself, why not just use the very infrared camera that you used to find this torch? Now surely that would have been the smarter and safer option to use. You know, on account of it not making near constant noise, putting your life at risk. As Sam and Becca are slowly but quietly attempting to make their way out of here, they're attacked by yet another one of the creatures, and just as it looks as if Becca's about to be cave dweller dinner, Juno launches an ice pick into the creature before snapping its neck. In the process, proving to the group that this is not the end. If they fight, stick together and don't give up, these creatures can be defeated and they might just make it back to the surface. That is, if they stop this whole trend of burying ice picks into each other's neck. That's awfully counterproductive. Sarah ends up coming across Beth, somehow still alive from the ice pick that was lodged into her throat, and after finding Beth, she manages to tell Sarah to watch out for Juno. That Juno did this to her, left her here, and is not to be trusted at all. Kind of forgetting the fact that this was obviously an accident. Beth somehow just simply refuses to die and begs Sarah to mercy kill her. And after about 5 seconds of saying no, she simply picks up the rock and crushes her skull with it. As you do, with no time to think about how her friend's brains, which are supposed to be inside of her head, are now in fact outside of her head, she's immediately attacked by a child creature in what I can only assume is the 500th jump scare of the movie, because this movie is just unfortunately full of them. Which is somewhat of a shame, because The Descent is one of those movies that already succeeds in creating a creepy and unsettling atmosphere from the premise and location alone. And even if you don't suffer from claustrophobia, it'd be undeniable to say that it doesn't make you uncomfortable. So it's a shame that it's muddied by the constant usage of an already overused trick. Oh yeah, back to the kid. Sarah stomps on it like a bug. She's then attacked by the mother creature, who surprisingly doesn't take too kindly to the whole stomping on her child incident, and the pair are sent flying into a giant pool of blood, because I guess you just never know when you might fancy bathing in the blood of your victims. She manages to kill the creature by stabbing it in the eye with a bone, but is once again immediately in danger as another one enters to look for her. Luckily, Sarah's mastered the art of bone combat and swiftly dispatches of the creature by cracking it over the head with a bone. What a bonehead. Followed by Sarah screaming at the top of her lungs, because apparently she just can't get enough of fighting creatures that won't think twice about disemboweling her. Juno, Sam and Becca find themselves confronted by a horde of blind creatures, but instead of just slowly and quietly backing up the way they came, Juno decides to scream run at the top of her lungs, because apparently she and Sarah just love the thrill of it all. Sam finds herself confronted by yet another sheer drop and not enough rope to cross it. That fact doesn't deter her as she goes for it anyway, and as Juno and Becca catch up to her, Sam finds herself confronted by a gravity-defying creature that proceeds to slice open her neck as she dangles there completely defenseless. With her last ounce of strength, she pulls out a pocket knife and repeatedly plunges it into the creature until it falls into the depths below, revealing that there's actually water below them. And before there's even any time to react to watching their friend being horrifically killed, Becca's immediately grabbed from behind and pulled backwards back into the passageway as the creature proceeds to devour her insides. So with nowhere to go, and hearing the splash of the falling creature earlier, Juno decides to leap off the edge and descend into the unknown waters below. She's able to finish off the gravity-defying creature that killed Sam and climb her way back out, and that's when she comes face to face with Sarah. This isn't the same quiet, shy woman dealing with the loss of her family who entered the cave. Just by looking at her eyes, you can tell that this is somebody entirely different. They push onwards in hope of reaching a way out of here, and the now battle-hardened women find themselves confronted by a trio of creatures. But seeing as Sarah's single-handedly wiped out an entire family of them earlier, 3 of them shouldn't prove to be much of an issue, and after a series of head-bashing, eyeball gouging, and ice pick planting, they're able to deal with them. And instead of simply focusing on their survival and leaving this people-eating, creature-infested cave system, Sarah reveals to Juno that she knows what she did to Beth. But instead of simply telling Sarah the truth, letting her know that it was a horrific accident and that there was no way to get her out of there, Juno just sort of stands there saying nothing, giving Sarah the opportunity to bury an ice pick into her leg to leave her behind as bait, giving her an opportunity at freedom. You know what they say about encountering Caucasian blind cannibal creatures, right? You don't have to be fast, just faster than the other person. But the sad fact is that Juno was actually the one who insisted that she, Sam and Becca stay back inside the cave to find Sarah before leaving. Sure, they did all die horrifically brutal deaths because of that decision, but still, it's the thought that counts. Moral of the story: screw everyone else and leave them alone to be eaten by cave creatures. As Sarah's running off, she falls down yet another dastardly placed hole in the ground, falling straight into a pit of bones, because if there's one thing that's for certain, it's that these creatures absolutely love their pits of bones. She can see the daylight ahead of her, and frantically crawls her way up a pile of bones and towards the exit. She breaks her way through a welcome sight of moss and grass, and sprints her way back to the car. And after getting in and flooring her way back to the main road, she pulls over to cry and be sick, because she clearly suffers from really bad car sickness, and when she's done and turns around, she sees the ghost of Juno staring directly into her face before actually waking up back in the cave, where it turns out she's been all along. She didn't climb her way out of that cave. After falling into the pit of bones, she was knocked unconscious, and that's where she stayed. After seeing a hallucination of her daughter, as perhaps as a mental safety net of sorts to block out the horrific nature of her reality, the camera slowly pans away to reveal that Sarah's trapped and that there's absolutely nowhere to go. And that's when the movie comes to an end. Because there's somewhat of an unwritten rule when it comes to British horror movies. They need to end in absolute and utter depression, because that's just how we are as a society. Well, that is, unless you watch the American release, as the original British ending was deemed far too soul-crushing for American audiences, so was edited to cut out the final minute or so, and finish as Sarah comes face to face with Juno's ghost. But you can at least take solace in the fact that due to the creature's generational isolation, if any of the women were to be carrying anything as minor as the common cold, well, chances are all of those naked, gravity-defying creatures would go extinct, because humans do have somewhat of a tendency to extinct other untouched societies in that manner. But of course, that'll all have to wait until the events of the sequel are done, because apparently there's a law stated somewhere that demands if a horror movie does somewhat well, then it absolutely must receive a subpar follow-up. Before this video comes to an end, I just want to let you guys know that my clothing brand Morbid Minds is now live. If you see anything that you like on screen and are potentially interested in any future drops, make sure you go to www.morbidminds.co.uk to cop yourself a cool t-shirt or hoodie. And while you're at it, why not give me a follow on Twitter? So before we finish, I just want to give a big thank you to my patrons. Thank you to Dom, Hunters263, Rebecca Pitts, A Dandy in Space, Martin Brannan, Natasha Twyman, Rin & Whiskey, Jared C. Bees, Nicholas, Pascal Mathis, Fighting the Pirates, Richard McGowan III, Macy J, Reese Harford, Horatio, Raimi Patterson, Chris, Michelle, Newcomb, Dennis, Wade Knott, Ike, Mr. J2, Ashley L. Wintz, Austin Wypert, Christopher Butsky, Jack the Riddler, Joshua Torres, and Axon Imari. Thank you so much to my patrons, and thank you to everyone else for watching.